Hey Virgo, either way, I'm glad you're here. Settle in. This one required honesty to write, and it's going to require honesty to receive. Let's skip the warm up. You were put in a position you never should have been in. Um, Not by circumstance, not by bad luck, by a specific person who made specific choices and then somehow left you holding the weight of consequences that were never yours to carry. And what's possibly the most infuriating part of all of it, you probably saw it coming. Some part of you, that sharp, analytical, detail oriented part of you that Virgo energy is famous for, had already clocked the inconsistencies, had already noticed the small things that didn't add up, the story that shifted slightly between tellings, the energy that felt off in a way you couldn't immediately articulate. You noticed, and then because you are also someone who gives people the benefit of the doubt, who believes in fairness, who refuses to accuse without evidence, you talked yourself out of what you noticed. Um, that right there, that specific move, noticing, then overriding the notice, that's the thing worth sitting with today. Because the shocking truth that might be surfacing around this situation isn't necessarily about them. It's about the gap between what you knew and what you allowed yourself to act on. And understanding that gap, not to punish yourself for it, never that, but to understand it clearly enough that it closes permanently. That's what today might actually be about. Virgo, you process differently than most signs. Uh, you don't just feel something and react. You feel something and immediately run it through a mental verification system. Is this rational? Is this fair? Do I have enough data to support this conclusion? Could I be wrong? Could I be projecting? Could there be an explanation I haven't considered yet? And that system, that beautiful, rigorous, intellectually honest system, is one of your greatest strengths. It keeps you from being impulsive, it keeps you fair. It keeps you from becoming the kind of person who burns things down on a feeling alone. But it also, in certain situations with certain people, can become the exact mechanism through which you get manipulated. Not because you're naive, you're the opposite of naive, but because your commitment to fairness can be exploited by someone who knows that if they just provide a plausible enough explanation, you'll give them another data point and another chance, another round of benefit of the doubt. Um, and they knew that about you. Whether consciously or not, they knew that about you. The situation they put you in likely had layers. It probably wasn't one dramatic moment of betrayal, though it might have eventually arrived there. More likely, it was a series of smaller moments, a pattern, each individual incident deniable enough, explainable enough, that you kept updating your assessment rather than trusting the cumulative weight of what you'd observed. And the cumulative weight was telling you something real. It was telling you the truth. Long before the truth became undeniable, um, this reflection invites you to consider, what was the first moment you knew? Not suspected, not worried, knew. That specific moment, possibly quiet, possibly small, possibly something that happened in the middle of an ordinary conversation when something in you went still, when the noise in your head stopped and there was just this clarity, this cold, clear knowing that something was wrong. What did you do with that moment? Uh, and more importantly, what would it mean to start trusting those moments instead of immediately putting them on trial? Because here's what might be the most confronting part of this entire reading. The person who put you in a terrible situation, they had help, not from anyone else. From the version of you that decided repeatedly that being wrong about them was preferable to being right, that being in an imperfect situation with them was safer than the uncertainty of walking away from it. Um, that keeping the peace, even a false peace, even a peace that cost you, was worth more than the disruption of telling the truth about what you saw. And that is not a character flaw. Um, that is a very human, very understandable, very Virgo specific response to a situation that required more emotional risk than felt available at the time. You were managing, you were coping, you were doing what made sense given what you believed was possible. But the reckoning that might be arriving now, this shocking truth that's surfacing, is asking you to update that belief system, to retire the version of you that tolerates the intolerable because at least it's known, and to step into the version of you that trusts the knowing even before the proof arrives. Um, let's talk about what they actually did. Not in the gossipy, sensational sense, but in the structural sense. Because understanding the architecture of how this happened is possibly more useful to you than any emotional processing alone. Virgo minds need to understand the mechanism. You need to see how the thing worked in order to dismantle it. So let's look at it. What this person possibly did was position you. They put you in a role, a function in their life that served their needs without fully accounting for yours. Maybe you were the stable one, the reliable one, the person they knew would show up, would fix things, would absorb the chaos and convert it into calm. And you did that because that is genuinely who you are. Someone who shows up, who tries, who applies their considerable capability to the people and situations they care about. But here's where it tipped into something problematic. Um, they started to rely on those qualities without reciprocating them, without seeing the cost to you, or, and this might be the harder possibility, to sit with they saw the cost to you and continued anyway because the arrangement worked for them, because you would manage, because you always managed. And the terrible situation they ultimately put you in was possibly the inevitable endpoint of a dynamic that had been unbalanced from much earlier than you've allowed yourself to admit. The shocking truth might not be the final event itself. The shocking truth might be how long the conditions for that event had been building and how many signs you processed, filed, and set aside in the interest of keeping things functional. That's the truth that gives people chills. Not because it's devastating, but because once you see it, you cannot unsee it. And once you cannot unsee it, everything changes. This reflection invites you to consider, what did this situation cost you that you haven't fully accounted for yet? Not just the obvious losses, not just the time, the energy, the emotional labor, um, but the subtler costs, the opportunities you didn't pursue because you were managing this, the parts of yourself you quieted down because they were inconvenient to the dynamic. The version of you that existed before this situation entered your life, what did that version have that you'd like back? And what would it take to begin reclaiming it? Because reclamation, that's the actual work of this moment, not revenge, not explanation seeking, not waiting for them to finally understand what they did and arrive at your door with the apology that would make it make sense. Virgo, you might wait a long time for that apology. And the painful, liberating truth is that your healing cannot be contingent on its arrival. Some people will never have the self awareness to understand the impact of what they did. Not because they're monsters, most people aren't monsters, but because genuine self reflection requires a level of discomfort that many people spend their entire lives actively avoiding, and waiting for someone with a limited capacity for self reflection to suddenly develop it on your timeline in the form you need is one of the quieter ways we keep ourselves stuck. So, what does reclamation actually look like for you practically? Because Virgo doesn't do well with vague directives. You need specificity, you need something concrete to work with. So, let's be concrete. Um, it might start with the audit, not a dramatic burning of bridges, audit a quiet, honest inventory of what this situation taught you about your own patterns. Where did you override your instincts? At what point did you know the cost was too high and continue paying it anyway? What did you tell yourself to justify staying in something that wasn't serving you? Write it down if you need to. Virgo processes through documentation. Put it somewhere you can see it clearly, not to punish yourself with it, but to make it real enough that the pattern becomes recognizable the next time it tries to assemble itself in a different form. Because patterns don't disappear when the person who triggered them leaves. They wait. They find new faces, new scenarios, new arrangements that feel different on the surface but carry the same underlying dynamic. And the only thing that interrupts a pattern is consciousness. Seeing it clearly enough, early enough, that you can make a different choice before you're already 3 years deep into the same story with a different cast. The second part of reclamation might involve reinstating the standards you lowered. And Virgo, you lowered them not because you don't have high standards. You have exceptionally high standards, often to the point of self sabotage. But in this particular situation with this particular person, something made you apply those high standards to everything except the most important question. Is this person actually good for me? Are they adding to my life or subtracting from it? Are they someone I can trust with the parts of me that aren't performing capability and competence, the parts that are uncertain, that need support, that occasionally require care instead of giving it? Because Virgo, one of the things this situation might be revealing is a tendency to apply your analytical rigor to everything, to your work, to your goals, to other people's behavior, but to soften that rigor when it comes to assessing whether someone deserves your continued investment. As if being too discerning about who you let close is somehow unkind, as if having requirements is the same as being cold. It isn't. Requirements are just self respect with a structure, and you are allowed to have them, especially now, especially after this. Um, this reflection invites you to consider, what would your standard actually look like if you wrote it down? Not a list of surface qualities, not height and career and aesthetics, but the deeper requirements. How do I need to be treated to feel safe? What does consistency look like in practice, not in promises? What are the behaviors, not the words, the behaviors that would tell me this person is trustworthy? Write that list. Know it so well that you can feel when something deviates from it before your mind has fully processed the deviation. Trust that feeling. That feeling is not paranoia. That feeling is your nervous system doing its job. It And the third part of reclamation, possibly the one that will take the longest and the one that matters most. Forgiving yourself for the part you played, not them, yourself. For the override, for the benefit of the doubt extended past its expiration date. For the moments you knew and chose not to act because the action required felt too costly. For the energy you gave to something that was taking more than it was returning, because somewhere underneath it all you believed that if you just gave a little more, tried a little harder, were a little more patient, it would balance out. Um, it didn't balance out, and that's not your failure. That's information. Information about the limits of effort in a dynamic that was structurally imbalanced from the start, and information for a Virgo is never wasted. It becomes data, it becomes wisdom, it becomes the thing that protects you going forward in ways that no amount of hoping or trusting or benefit of the doubt ever could. You are sharper now than you were before this happened. Not colder, sharper. There is a difference. Cold closes, sharp discerns, and the version of you emerging from this situation is possibly more discerning, more boundaried, more clear about what you will and will not accept, not because you've hardened, but because you've finally decided that your own well being is worth protecting with the same rigor you apply to everything else in your life. That decision, quiet, internal, not announced to anyone, might be the most significant thing that's happened through all of this. Not the situation itself, not what they did, but what you decided in response to it. That's yours. That belongs to you entirely. And nobody, not this person, not the next person, not any situation that tries to replicate this dynamic can take that from you. Um, the power is yours. It always has been. Go forward from this, Virgo, not with bitterness, not with a fortress where your heart used to be, but with clarity. With the specific, grounded, unshakable clarity of someone who looked at a difficult situation directly, understood it fully, and chose to use it as fuel rather than weight. That's the move. That has always been the move. And you're more ready to make it than you probably feel right now. Take what resonates, softly release the rest, trust yourself. Take care of yourself, Virgo. For real this time, not the performative version, the actual daily, you deserve it version. See you in the next one.